Tonight we have a treat. We have two gentlemen who have spent a great deal of time preparing a three-part series for us on the Constitution of the United States. And I don't know about you, the last time that I really took a hard look at the Constitution was probably in high school, where we had American history or civics or something like that, where we had to learn about the Constitution. And so these gentlemen have spent a lot of time, and I'm looking forward to hearing them tonight, and I know you are too. Ted Bowman, who has worked tirelessly in the party since he's been here, and Tony joins us this year, Tony Orta, and they're going to make the presentation. So without further ado, gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. My name is Ted Bowman, and with my wife, I've lived in this greater metropolitan area for about 30 years. The last over 3 years, we've lived in Big Canoe. We've come here to make our homes, and we hope to be able to make this presentation meaningful to you. My erstwhile co-partner here is Tony Orta, and he'll say a few words about himself, and then we'll get right into it because we know you want to have a chance to hear this presentation this evening. I would ask you, it's not that we want to keep questions down, but we'd like to go ahead and get through the presentation. If there's something you're seeing up here that you say, geez, I just don't understand what this is about, please raise your hand and ask. Otherwise, if you hold your questions till the end, then we'll be happy to have a Q&A session for as long as you'd like afterwards, or if you don't like. Tony, why don't you just introduce yourself, and we'll get going here.
I'll introduce myself. I can't talk and sit down at the same time.
I can, he can.
So I'll stand up. I'm Tony Orta. I was born and raised and educated in Cuba. And so I come to the understanding and the appreciation, and indeed in my case the adoration of the U.S. Constitution from a different standpoint. I had the distinct intimate knowledge of what it feels like to live in a country that does not enjoy the U.S. Constitution and the rights that it conveys to its citizens. And I've lived in Pickens County. I've been a resident of Pickens County now for about 12, 13 years, and I'm excited about talking to you about our Constitution today. This is the first in a series of presentations, 3 of them, one this month, one in April, and one in May. And during those 3 presentations, we hope to cover the Constitution thoroughly, and we hope that we can bring you a better understanding of the Constitution. We believe, we're doing this because we believe it is extremely important that our citizens, all our citizens, more fully understand the history, the heritage, and the future our country faces. You know, it's a funny week. The Constitution, some people you hear talk about the Constitution as, oh, it was written so long ago, it's an instrument that needs to be changed, it needs to be... And yet, if you turn on your television this week, up front and center is a constitutional question. Did the President act with the constitutional bounds when he sent armed forces to Libya? Did he act within the War Powers Act? Is that a constitutional legislation? So everything about the news this week is about the Constitution. So it is not an obsolete instrument. It is very much alive, and it has everything to do with our lives. So let me get right to it. Let's talk a little bit, put it in historical context, because I think it's important that we understand how we came about adopting this precious document. You know, I wonder if most of you realize that our ancestors were living in America, in the United States, as subjects of the British Crown for almost 200 years before our Constitution was adopted. 200 years, almost. And we've only been under this Constitution for 222. So the Constitution came about halfway point in the history of us as a people. Started, of course, in Jamestown, Virginia in 1603. Then later Plymouth, New Amsterdam, Maryland, Providence, Rhode Island, and all the colonies. And all of these colonies were founded by British subjects, but leaving Great Britain in great respect because they were trying to start a new life away from what they perceived to be tyrannical behavior on the part of the British monarch. And yet all of them had one thing in common. All of them were founded with very, very strong religious bases and a high concern for human dignity. Now, what are the sources of our law? Where does law come from? Well, 5 places. The constitutions, and here I'm referring to the U.S. Constitution, and of course the Constitution of each and every one of our states. Legislation, which adds to the body of law. One extremely important one, administrative regulations and decisions. Now, an awful lot of what today is being passed as for law in the United States has come about in the last 2 years by administrative regulation. Bureaucrats sit in a building somewhere and say, this is how you will do this. Executive orders, of course, where the executive branches of government, whether it be U.S. or states, etc., determine. And finally, judicial decisions, or the interpretation of our law by the judiciary. So essentially, our law comes from 5 different sources. Now, how did we come to have and adopt what is the Constitution? What led to that? I've told you we had British subjects here for almost 200 years, living in the colonies. And yet, leading to that point, there were some very, very significant events that took place. The Magna Carta in 1215, where for the first time there began to be some recognition that the monarch was not totally and absolutely all-encompassing, and there were some rights at least acknowledged for the non-royals. The Petition of Rights, 1628, the Bill of Rights, 1689, all of these British. The Mayflower Compact, and it's very important that we consider the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact is simply an agreement that the settlers in the Mayflower reached with each other as to how, okay, we're going to establish a colony, we're going to run this thing by ourselves. We are a long ways away from England. How are we doing this? How are we going to govern and run our behavior in this colony? The other part of the Mayflower Compact that I think we need to just sort of, at least in historical context, understand is that via the Mayflower Compact, the settlers were also hoping that, and they said this in the compact, that God would inspire them to lead their colony. And they, in fact, placed their faith in their inspiration and in God. But it was deeply religious. And all the other similar compacts in all the other colonies, along with the royal charters, and these, of course, were provided by Great Britain, by the king, and there were their, let's say, administrative regulations on how these colonies were to be conducted. Now, all of that brought us to the Revolutionary War, and eventually the Declaration of Independence and the adoption of the Constitution. But how did all that get started? I mean, 200 years of living here. Well, first the Stamp Act. And it's funny, because for the very first time, it was clear that this continent, that America, that what we know today as the United States, could be economically successful, because see, up to that point, really, it wasn't. A bunch of separate colonies in this land somewhere. But all of a sudden, these colonies began to produce. And that production began to attract the attention of the British monarchy, and they thought, we can obtain revenues from those colonies. So every good produced in the colonies, henceforth, will have a stamp. Will have to carry a stamp. Of course, that was a form of taxation. Led to the phrase taxation without representation, because the colonists were imposed this tax but had nothing to say about it. You shall do it, and that's the end of that. That feeling of dissatisfaction led to the king bringing more armies, more soldiers over to the United States to impose his will, which led eventually to the Boston Massacre. And yes, the Boston Tea Party, an open act of rebellion. Lexington and Concord battles, the Continental Congress. So you see a progression here of organization in objection to a strong and tyrannical ruler. Finally, the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Articles of Confederation, which was the first attempt at reaching a form of the Constitution. Ted, why don't you tell us about the Declaration?
Well, the